Hey everyone, welcome back to my shop. I've been needing a new miter saw for a little bit, and it seemed like a good opportunity to make a miter saw station. I have a DeWalt 12-inch. It's not a sliding, so the capacity is a little reduced. That I use mainly just to break down lumber, but it's sounding pretty sickly, and it's also sitting on a stand in front of my double doors, which I'd like to open. I also have a radial arm saw, which is the dust collection on it is terrible, and it's sitting in the middle of the shop and takes up a lot of space. So it was time for those to go and me to consolidate them into this one sliding miter saw. I got a Bosch, obviously, if you can't tell. I'm not a cabinet maker. I don't enjoy making cabinets. In fact, I've only made a couple of frameless cabinets before, and when they turned out square, I thought it was like a master carpenter. So I did a few things on this to try and make it easier on myself, and that's what I want to cover. So the first thing I did to make this whole process easier was I bought plans. I was on YouTube looking at different cabinet makers. This guy has quite a few videos on making cabinets and seems to know what he's doing, and he also sells plans. So that's the route I went. The name of his channel is MWA Woodworks. I'll leave a link down below in the description, as well as a link to the different products I used. Having a track saw would have been nice because I could have cut it to its final dimension when I was breaking it down, but that YouTube money's just not quite rolling in just yet, so I'm still using my circular saw, and I just did a rough cut, and then I moved it over to my table saw to cut it down to its final dimensions. Another thing I did to make this easier on myself was I bought pre-finished birch plywood from my local cabinet supply. There's a couple benefits here. The quality is better than what you would get at a big box store, and it's also cheaper, and it's pre-finished, so you don't have to finish it when you're done. For cutting out the toe kicks, I just used my combination square to mark them out, and then my framing square with my jigsaw to do the cutting. I used a blade that had at least 10 teeth per inch, which left a pretty good finish on the plywood. Once the sides were cut and the toe kicks were done, I started cutting the stretchers out on my table saw using my crosscut sled. I could have done this on my radial arm saw because it does have a Kreg flip stop on it, but at this point of the project I was trying to be super accurate, and the cat's Moses stop block on my crosscut sled has zero movement to it, and the Kreg flip stop does have a little bit of a wiggle to it. And now I'm here at my pocket hole jig, and it is, I think, essential if you're making cabinets. I don't know if they get a bad rap just with YouTubers or people who don't like them, but I think if you're going to do cabinets, it's essential. I need to start putting the grooves into the sides of the plywood for the bottom to fit in and the back to fit in. The back is 1/4 inch, the sides are 3/4, and the bottom's 3/4. I bought the router bit set for plywood. The measurement of the 3/4 inch bit is not 3/4, it is 23/32. The plywood is 45/64. So if we double the bit, it's 46/64. So it's a 1/64 bigger than the ply. So how big is that? I don't know. Nobody knows. But if you go to metric, because the plywood is imported, the plywood is 17.8 millimeters and the bit is 18 millimeters. The router bits worked very well. There's only a couple of things. One was self-inflicted. I didn't tighten the collet enough when I was using the 3/4 inch one, and it moved in the router and threw off my measurements a little bit. The second thing is they're very dusty. So if you're going to do a lot of cabinets, I think you're better off with a dado blade, but if you're just going to do the occasional cabinet, I think these are nice because you put them in there and they're one and done. I cleaned up my edges with a sanding sponge on my shop vac just to clean out any remaining sawdust. Now I'm making 4 cabinets all together, 2 variations of the same cabinet. So we're going to have 4 feet on either side of the chop saw. I know a lot of you out there are saying I could have just used a single piece in the middle, but at this point I'm still sticking to the directions or the plans. When I was attaching the stretchers to the front of the carcass, I used a spacer block, and I really should have cut that into 2 pieces and clamped either piece to the side. That would have made it a lot easier. Once the cabinets were together, I slid the backs in, and you can either screw through the 1/4 inch material into the stretcher, or use a pin nailer, but I ended up using screws. Last summer I made a deal with a retiring cabinet maker for a whole bunch of hardwood that he had stashed away from 35 years of cabinet making. My intention was to make the face frame and the drawer fronts out of white oak, since I had plenty on stock, but it didn't work out that way. I'll get more into that later, but for now it's back to the crosscut sled and the pocket hole jig. When I made my face frame, it's when I strayed from the drawings a little bit. Since I joined my two cabinets together, my center part here was 1.5 inches, and I cut my center stile, which is the vertical part of the face frame. I cut that to be flush with both pieces. The outside stiles have a 1/4 inch reveal on both sides of it. So when I mounted the drawer slides, I had to use a 1/4 inch shim on the outside, but on the center one, they're flush. So I didn't have to use a shim. I kind of prefer that. And I don't know if it's right or wrong, but if I was to do it again, I think I would make it flush on the outside too and just have a 1/4 inch reveal on the outside and then do away with having to use shims. Now, before I can glue the face frames to the cabinets, I needed to screw them together to make the two cabinets into one and making them more rigid. Now, even though the drawings didn't call for it, I added a couple of stretchers in the back of each cabinet, just something that I could attach the top to later. I didn't want to make a huge mess, so I laid the cabinets on their backs so all the glue wouldn't end up on the floor, and I used about every clamp I had to glue the face frames on, and I usually like to do a little overkill. And I think if I was to do this again, I would have put some pocket holes in the front of the cabinets to give the face frames a mechanical attachment as well as the glue. My shop's on a concrete slab, and I don't want the moisture wicking through the slab and into the plywood, so I am just going to put some leftover white oak strips onto the bottom. At this point, the carcasses are pretty much complete. I just need to mount the drawer slides, and so I got a large piece of scrap. I cut that down to the height of my highest drawer slide, and I mounted it, and then cut it down to the next size, and just so on and so on until I got to the bottom drawer mount. On the outer sides of the cabinet, I did have to add a 1/4 inch shim to make the drawer slides even with the reveal of the face frame, so I used a bit of glue and just some staples to hold that shim in place. Once the slides are all in place, and before the boxes start getting too heavy, I got my wife and we just moved them to where they're going to live in the shop. There's a couple variations on these cabinets you can do. The straightforward is the 4 drawers, and I did 2 of those, and then I also did 2 of these cabinets, which originally called for a door to be here and shelves inside. I knew I was always going to go with the drawers, but what I should have done is add a stretcher between the 2 drawers to be consistent with everything else. I didn't do that. I think it turned out okay. It still looks good. It's just a little inconsistent with the rest of the drawers, and I probably should have added a stretcher. So I was going to make everything here out of white oak. Didn't turn out that way. The face frames and the toe kicks are white oak. I grabbed a big piece of white oak for these larger drawer fronts. I wasn't going to have to glue anything up, so that was a no-brainer. But as I was milling it up, that's red oak. So when it came time to do the smaller pieces, or the smaller drawer fronts, I went and grabbed a small piece of the red oak, and it wasn't until I was finishing it that I really looked at it, and it's not red oak. I think it's ash. I've never seen this wood before. It's a lighter colored wood. And I think it's ash, but if you know what it is, leave it in the comments. I really don't mind the combination of wood. I still think it looks good. When it came time to making the drawers, I strayed from the drawings a little bit. I don't know that all drawer slides are equal, so I measured mine and then went from there as far as the dimensions of the box. I put one together just as a test fit, and it worked pretty good, so then it was just a matter of cutting everything up and putting the grooves in, and lots of pocket holes, which seemed to go on forever. And then sticking them together, I used a little bit of glue on the bottom. But yeah, it's a pretty mind-numbing task, and the worst part about it is that I'm only halfway done. I pre-drilled some holes in the drawer fronts, and then I set the drawer front in place using some shims, and then just reached in there and screwed them both together. The plans also called for doing a shaker style drawer front, and I opted to go with just a solid piece of wood. I like the look, it's a little bit cleaner, more contemporary looking, and also it was less work. I also pre-drilled my drawer fronts for the handles, and once the drawer fronts were in place, I drilled through and just connected the handle. I've got one of the tops of the cabinets laid out here. It's going to be 1.5 inches thick. I have one piece cut, a solid piece underneath, and then I've got a piece here that's about 10 inches. I've got some playing cards as spacers, then some T-track, and then another piece here for the remainder to fill up the gap to the back. This particular one is going to be on the right side of the chop saw, and then the other one is going to have a couple more perpendicular pieces of T-track, so I can add a fence in the future if I feel like I need one. I realize that with the tops glued up, I can fasten them to the cabinets and get the drawers in, which will do a lot to clean up the shop because they're scattered everywhere. I put some of the oak trim around the top, which I still need to glue on, and then I'm going to cover the whole thing with a laminate and then clean it up with a trim router. I pre-drilled my holes and countersunk them, so I just need to attach them. Now the tops might look a little funny because they don't overhang the rest of the cabinet. If I was to do that, I would have had to have gotten another sheet of plywood because it's more than 2 feet deep and it's 1.5 inches thick. I didn't want to get another sheet of plywood. I wanted to spend my money on the Formica top. It's actually not Formica, it's Wilson Art, but it's the same thing. And it's over $100 a sheet. I could have used melamine. My local cabinet shop has black melamine. It's about half the cost, about $50 a sheet. But I wanted the detail of the Formica or Wilson Art coming over the front trim on the plywood. And I put a little bevel detail on there as well. For the platform for the saw, I made a torsion box out of some 3/4 ply and some 2x2s I milled up. I attached the cleat to the side of each cabinet. Because of the trim on the front of the cabinets, I couldn't slide it in. I had to attach the top and then come back later and attach the bottom. I had to make the platform pretty wide to allow for this part of the saw to rotate when making angled cuts. This handle sticks out quite a ways. I'm going to go without a fence for a while, but I did put in some T-track there perpendicular to where I'm going to run my stop block, just in case I really miss it. I ended up going with the Bosch 12-inch miter saw. The reviews of it are pretty good. I picked up a shop vac as a dedicated dust collection because I didn't really want to run my shop dust collection over. It was cheaper just to pick up a shop vac. These saws don't have a good reputation for dust collection, and I ordered the aftermarket dust collection from Shop Nation. So until that shows up, I am just going to have to run it, tape this hose to it, I think. It is running off one of those eye sockets though, so whenever the saw turns on, it automatically turns on the vacuum. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned that I didn't like making cabinets, and this process has not changed that fact. I still don't like making cabinets, but they're not so intimidating anymore. I'm glad I did it. The next time I do it, I'll have a better understanding of how the drawers and the face frames and the drawer slides all kind of interact with each other. I added some much needed storage to the shop, and I'm very happy with the project. It'll be a while before I make another cabinet though. But I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, please list them down below. Any tips, Be happy to hear them. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.